Well, Francis Ngannou just made the UFC and the PFL look really stupid. UFC for letting him go and PFL for showing how shit their competition is and how lackluster it is. It's great to see Francis back. It's actually beautiful. I'm a big fan of Francis Ngannou. It's just great to see, man, after, getting knocked out by AJ, arguably getting robbed against Fury. Obviously this is a guy who's been through a lot of shit, working in a sand quarry at 10. Guy was homeless in Paris. And, the UFC threw this guy to the side. Most people thought he made a mistake, and he's proved everyone wrong, you know what I'm saying? I mean, he's popping off right now. Just got a first round KO at the PFL. He's their champ, and he's pretty much the only person in the PFL that anyone at all gives a single shit about. So I thought, after the guy's big win this weekend, I think everyone wanted that to happen. Now was a perfect time to kind of slightly go over the guy's life and overall go on about his UFC career and his MMA career at the top so far, and just how goated this man is in general. We start off when Francis was just 10 years old, and with his surroundings and with his family's financial status, this guy was fucked and had no choice but to be working by the age of 10, okay? He was leaking sweat and drops of blood, sweat and tears, okay, in a sand quarry. The physical labor for someone of 10 years of age, it ain't fit for a child, okay? But this shaped Francis, and with his general genetic gifts and just being very, gifted genetically, and putting in insane physical labor from the age of 10, this made Francis a fucking beast physically. Now obviously this isn't the ideal for anyone. No one wants this type of life where you just gotta be slaving away until your fucking legs don't work no more and just be fucked, okay? No one's trying to live a life where there's no quality of life in it. You're just working to survive, you know what I'm saying? So Francis would start boxing at the age of 22, and then he set his eyes on Paris, France. He wanted a better life. He wanted a better life for his family, but a lot of shit was going wrong. Francis was arrested on multiple occasions while trying to get over there. He nearly died multiple times, and he got arrested in France, and he spent some months in prison. He spent 2 months in prison in France, and then when he got let out, he had nothing. He had nothing. He was on the street, homeless. Now while on the street, Francis would hang around an MMA gym, and the coach of this gym, Didier Carmon, offered him to come inside, and this is where Francis was introduced to MMA. He'd go on to be 5-1 on the regional scene before getting signed with the UFC, and this is where the UFC part of Francis' career began. Now the way I spoke before about how Francis was very gifted genetically, with his build and shit like that, he was also extremely gifted with the God-given power. He might be the hardest hitting man that we're aware of on the planet. Maybe there's some freaky guy in Bangladesh who fucking hits harder or some shit like that. Who knows? But as we know, Francis is the hardest hitter we've ever saw. It's between him and Deontay Wilder. But his UFC debut, he'd fight Luis Henrique, and he'd win by KO, obviously, knock him out cold. But then in his second fight, he'll fight a name that you're actually familiar with in Curtis Blades. Now this win would age very, very well. Okay, Curtis Blades had become a top contender in the heavyweight division, and this got stopped due to doctor stoppage. Francis really put the whooping on this guy and fucked him up pretty bad. Then Francis would go on to fight Bojan. Can't pronounce his second name, not even gonna try. And guess what it resulted in? Another first round knockout. Then his next fight, he decided to switch it up a bit against Anthony Hamilton. Submission Kimura. And then he'd fight another name that you're familiar with, Andrei Arlovski. Now obviously Arlovski's a legend, but this is 2017, so it's not prime Arlovski at all. But shit, in this era of the heavyweights, Arlovski was still top 10 somehow, and Francis knocks him out in the first round. Common theme here. Now, this is maybe when this was definitely Francis in his first run at the peak of his powers, when he knocked Overeem out cold. Maybe one of the best KOs of all time, KO of the year for 2017.
has arrived!
Whoa! That's what we were talking about, ladies and gentlemen.
And this also guaranteed Francis a title shot, which he'd get only 2 months after this fight. Actually, a month and a half. Now, moving on to the Stipe fight itself, shit, Francis got shown that MMA ain't just all about knockouts, okay? He got showed a class in wrestling. He got taught a lesson in wrestling. He got taught that he needs to learn how to wrestle. And Francis didn't just get the KO this time. It didn't just come to him. He got outskilled. And his confidence went. Like, in his next fight against Derrick Lewis, he'd lose that as well just by not throwing a punch in one of the most boring fights in UFC history. But then, the turning point happened. In late 2018, Francis would beat Curtis Blades yet again, and Francis just switched on at this point. He'd beat the legend Cain Velasquez, which yes, out of his prime, but still an alright one, and he'd go on to beat another legend in JDS. And at the time, a top contender in Jairzinho Rozenstruik was rising up the rankings. You wanna know what Francis did to him? Knocked him out in 20 seconds. And now it's time for the rematch with Stipe. And Francis beat Stipe 10 times harder than Stipe beat Francis by knocking him out in the second round after dominating him in the other 2 rounds beforehand. Okay, some serious shit. And then he defended his title against maybe the best striker in UFC heavyweight history in Cyril Gane and would beat him. Now at this point, Francis rightfully thought that he deserved more money from the UFC and more compensation, especially for the super fight versus John Jones that was bound to happen. But didn't actually happen. Never did. It was fucking fucked up, man. Box up. But Francis would leave the UFC and would go to boxing. Now in boxing he'd fight Tyson Fury and arguably beat Tyson Fury, but in his next fight he got knocked the fuck out by AJ. Now at this point, Francis was signed to the PFL and he had a fight scheduled against Renan Ferreira, the PFL champ, for October 19th, 2024, which would have been nearly 3 years after his last fight in MMA. This fight just wrapped up and Francis KO'd him in the first round. What the fuck, bro? Francis is crazy, man. Crazy guy. But I just thought I'd make this video real quick because I fuck with Francis heavy and just talk about his journey a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, man, like, subscribe, do all that in a bit. Much love. Goodbye.